much for joining me near to Halloween, and I wanted to do a very simple book reading for you. From this article that I found that lifts the veil on the Victorians' fascination for death and mourning. That I came across in one of the lovely nostalgic magazines that I shared with you in another video. I love these simple book videos and the sound of paper, so I hope you find it relaxing too. With the deepest sorrow, the widow of Windsor. On the 14th of December 1961, Windsor Castle witnessed a tragedy. Queen Victoria's beloved husband and father of her 9 children died of a suspected typhoid fever, or possibly Crohn's disease, as modern researchers suggest. After a 21-year partnership and a joint rule of the country, Victoria had lost her lover, confidant and best friend. Albert's death marked the beginning of the reign of the widow of Windsor. The grief-stricken queen was inconsolable and became a recluse. She clad herself in black and insisted on her children and servants doing the same as a sign of respect. The country soon followed suit, and a new fashion for deep mourning was now all the talk among the well-to-do society. The Prince Consort's rooms were kept as pristine as they were during his life. A water basin was placed on the dressing table for his morning shave, and even his chamber pot was meticulously cleaned every day. By Victoria's decree, statues of Albert were erected in every part of the country. The Parliament and subjects that had initially sympathised with the Queen's loss were now beginning to worry about the national budget and the no expense spared philosophy their monarch adopted to glorify her departed husband. The Victorian cult of death was well on the way to becoming one of the most bizarre phenomena in British history. flourishing business for undertakers. The Industrial Revolution brought remarkable new technology, but was also the principal reason for the overpopulated London slums. Child mortality was a daily occurrence due to diphtheria and chlorea and malnutrition and typhoid and tuberculosis. Even the genteel society was not immune to the visits of the Grim Reaper. Penicillin, antiseptics and anaesthetics had not yet been invented, making surgery and even childbirth a dangerous procedure. Many foods contained harmful additives. An example is alum for bleaching bread. Poisons like strychnine and arsenic were widely available from the local chemist and commonly used for poisoning rats. Alarming quantities of arsenic were even present in the fashionable green wallpaper and fabrics marketed by William Morris. Children's toys and kitchen utensils were often made out of lead and highly corrosive carbolic acid that was used in the cleaning products. Death was becoming a lucrative business. When a loved one died, all the mirrors in the house were covered by a dark veil to prevent the spirit of the deceased of being trapped in one of them. If a mirror fell or broke, it was believed that another member of the family would shortly die. All the clocks were stopped at the hour of death to keep bad luck at bay, and the body would usually be kept in the house until all the funeral preparations were complete. Although pompous ceremonies were considered undignified, a lavish funeral would signify that the deceased was a person of comfortable means. Even the poorer classes would ensure to give their loved ones a decent burial and send them to meet the Maker in clean and respectable attire. The undertaker would manage every aspect of the funeral. He worked in collaboration with coffin and gravestone makers and would provide the hearse and the horses for the procession. The number of ostrich feather plumed horses would determine the status of the deceased and their family. So it was the case for the ornate gravestones and elegantly padded coffins that granted a peaceful, eternal rest. If the attendance at a funeral was expected to be meagre, professional mourners or mutes could be hired to look grave and lament for the loss of their departed. Black is the new magenta. Department stores and catalogue companies that specialised in the death trade would ensure to meet the ever-increasing demand for mournicalia. Black furniture, jewellery, accessories and clothing were all sought-after items. Jay's Mourning Warehouse off Regent Street, a dressmaker and milliner, provided valuable advice on strict mourning etiquette. When entering deep mourning, vivid bright colours were shunned, and a widow was required to wear her black widow's weeds for a year and a day. The material used for the deep mourning was crepe or bombazine, a non-reflective black fabric that could not be embroidered, giving the wearer a respectable and grave appearance. A bonnet and a dark veil were also part of the lady's attire. At the time half mourning was adopted, lighter colours like grey and mauve, lilac and white were acceptable, and less restrictive fabrics could be worn. Wearing jewellery during deep mourning was considered inappropriate. And extravagant. The only exception to the rule was jet lignite, a fossiled predecessor of coal. The sombre and understated quality of this semi-precious stone made it an ideal choice for dignified widows. The finest jet derived from Whitby on the Yorkshire coast and was popularised by Queen Victoria. Macabre memorabilia. The increased mortality rate meant that Victorian population had to find ways to cope with their grief and mourn their departed. After the invention of the daguerreotype, apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly, in 1839 photography was opposed to painted portraits and became an affordable option if preserving the likeness of your loved ones. It was not customary for the poor to commission images of infants or children in life. After they died, however, their likeness will almost always be taken to commemorate their brief existence on earth. The carte de vista was a greeting card that could be produced in multiple prints so the photograph of the dead child could be sent to the extended family and friends. Photographic studios were asked to portray the dead body with a lifelike expression. The little corpse was placed on a chair with the eyes propped open. Most dead sitters were holding flowers or toys and were often surrounded by proximate family. After taking the image, the photograph was enhanced by adding pupils, blushing cheeks, and rosy lips. Some children were shown laying on a bed of roses or in their own coffin and portrayed as innocent, sleeping angels. One other macabre ritual was to wear a piece of jewellery that contained human hair. The hair of the departed was cut off and fashioned into a discreet medallion or brooch, but also into a large and intricate bracelets and buckles, chains, or ornate hairnets. Messages from the other side. The overwhelming desires to re-establish a contact with the soul of a dearly departed opened a niche for a new emerging trade. Spiritualism. Charlatans would prey upon impressionable individuals and use tricks and mesmerisms to make them hear or sometimes see the spirits of their deceased family members. Florence Cook, an estimated London medium, was famous for her lively seances and would use special effects like materialization, table turning, ghost writing, disembodied voices, levitation as her repertoire. The year the Prince Consort died, a teenage boy from Leicester who was present at his family's séance passed a message from Albert to the Queen, in which he called her by her pet name only to the couple. The craze spread almost instantly, and several spiritualist societies were formed, introducing their own pamphlets and journals. Contributions came from famous members like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, and the female poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning. The expression memento mori, Latin for remember that you will die, was constantly present in Victorian life. Skulls appeared on magazine covers, ghost literature, coffin engravings, and even jewellery. One of the most visited shows in London was the Phantasmagoria, a cautionary tale dramatisation that used slides to project deadly apparitions for the amusement of the audience. The fascination with death became a morbid obsession. Coffin, alarms, and resurrectionists. Medical science was still fairly experimental, and a state of deep coma could very easily be mistaken for death, especially in poor areas where unqualified doctors or quacks would be called to assist the patient. The terror of being buried alive was so widely spread that a new device, a coffin alarm, appeared on the market. A string or chain with a bell at its end would be attached to the ring placed on the finger of the deceased and connected to the headstone. Should the cadaver suddenly awake, the dead ringer would literally be saved by the bell. Body snatchers who would dig up a freshly buried corpse and sell it to medical schools for anatomy lessons frequently disturbed the peace of the graveyard in order to procure the bodies faster. The vicious Burke and Hare from Edinburgh even resorted to killing poor, unsuspecting members of the public. Desperate romantics. One of the saddest stories ever told is the sorry tale of Elizabeth Siddal. Lizzie was the first pre-Raphaelite muse and the model of Sir John Everett Millais, Ophelia. While posing for Ophelia, she was asked to lay in a bath of hot water. After several hours, the water cooled down to a chilling degree, and Lizzie lost her senses and almost drowned. She survived, but was plagued by lung disease for the rest of her short life. To soften her physical pain and numb the sorrows caused by her husband, Dante Gabriel Rossetti's infidelity, Lizzie became a laudanum addict. On a dark winter's night, she took a fatal dose and died shortly after. As an ultimate romantic gesture, Rossetti buried his unfortunate bride holding a manuscript of original selected poems. 7 years after Elizabeth's death, Rossetti was eager to retrieve the manuscripts, publish the poems, and dedicate them to his current lover and muse, Jane Morris. Liz's corpse was exhumed, and according to an eyewitness, the body was perfectly preserved. Her flowing hair had kept growing and filled the coffin. Faithful into death. The most famous canine mourner of all time is Greyfriars Bobby. This tiny Skye Terrier kept a vigil at his master's grave until his own death 14 years later. He became Edinburgh's mascot and a much loved presence at Greyfriars Cemetery, where locals fed him and looked after him. Bobby's tale was popularised by cinema, and his bronze statue can still be found opposite the churchyard. Another peculiar story is that of his Sydney jilted bride, Eliza Donnythorne, who was abandoned by her groom on her wedding day, and Eliza spent the rest of her life in a dark room with her rotting wedding cake, and her door left ajar in case her beloved groom changed his mind. It is believed that Dickens based the character of Miss Havisham on this unfortunate girl. In 1901, Queen Victoria was dying, and after 40 years of wearing black and pining for her lost love, the widow of Windsor's mortal remains were covered in her wedding veil. She was finally ready to be reunited with her darling Albert. As grim as that was, I hope you found it relaxing. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you again